everybody. I'm going to get our presentation started. Our case study is Chloe Smith and our population as mandated clients. Here is a list of the group members and all of the topics we will be introducing. I'll be taking a look at mandated clients and the society and culture of cannabis. So the prevalence of mandated clients has increased over the past few decades due to shift in criminal justice system. There is now an increased focus on rehabilitation and treatment versus incarceration and harsh prison sentences. They've also found that there's a reduction in tax dollars by focusing on treatment, as well as high rates of recidivism that they were seeing are now in turn lower due to treatment. Impacts of being a mandated client. Oftentimes when an individual is a mandated client, they can feel like they're doing time, they are sentenced to their treatment, and they're oftentimes focused on things like their release date or focused on pleasing their PO or their judge versus successful completion of their program and identifying goals and what matters to them. They're working to kind of please others to get around and get what they need. A big part of this also is language and its implications on a person's identity as a mandated client. Words like court-ordered, in denial, resistant, non-compliant, bad attitude. When a therapist uses these words towards a client, they can kind of embody that negative stigma and shame associated with being a mandated client, in turn kind of having a negative self-view and feeling like there's no hope. So that can be negative for a client. And then clients are identified as mandated through the justice system, judges, through the probation system, through the child welfare system, as well as their employers who may feel like an employee is struggling and they kind of want to support a person and kind of let them know this is the last resort. A couple theories that go great with mandated clients. The first is person-centered theory with Carl Rogers. This focuses on unconditional positive regard for a person and being genuine, listening to them empathically, and including them in their treatment process. There's also the self-determination theory that takes a look at external forces being the people mandating the treatment versus self-determination, and that's a person's own will and reasoning and goals for wanting to move forward, and how oftentimes if external forces undermine a person's own reasons, then they're not going to value the treatment and feel like they're autonomous and have control. There's also the stages of change model, which will really look at meeting a person where they are in their treatment and recovery and not jumping ahead, kind of meeting them where they are. And then finally, Rooney's 4-stage process, which really as a whole brings a client into the decision-making process and informs them about what their treatment is and keeping them a part of it, giving them control. Taking a look at some history, really Stroessner talked about how mandated clients were viewed or labeled as quote unquote addicts and they have a moral problem, so they have to be treated by punishment. And so because they're immoral, they deserve to be punishment is what the view was. The war on drugs also exacerbated this, where first-time offenders were given extreme harsh sentences, and it was totally okay under this because, they were quote-unquote immoral. And taking a look at social control, which impacts decision for treatment. When an individual is mandated, they lose any autonomy or self-control they have by basically being forced to go through treatment, which can have an impact on their readiness to change. So if they're not ready to change, then they're going to have a hard time. They're going to have a hard time coming around and committing to the process, which can be challenging as a therapist who wants to give the client self-determination and have control, but they're also mandated. And so where do you meet them? Taking a look at culture, really taking a systems approach to this and adopting a cultural lens to look at a person and their complete system, their home, their school, their family, their community, and understanding what all those systems mean to them and how they can be a strength to a person to empower change, as well as awareness of self. So a therapist checking their own biases and views around race, class, drugs, any social influences, and making sure that they don't carry that into the therapeutic relationship with the client. So research shows that there is no correlation between risk and sociodemographic considerations. So there isn't one particular race or age that could be more vulnerable to becoming a mandated client. This was tough. I spent a lot of time trying to find some sort of statistic to throw out there of like how many mandated clients are there, what does there look like. But Sotero really emphasizes that there is limited research on risk-based demographics because ultimately anybody can be at risk through the criminal justice, child welfare, or employment systems. So there isn't one particular client that looks like a mandated client. Risk factors also, having a strong family and social support system can be valuable for a client. If they're satisfied with their family life, with their social life, then they have a positive social network of people that don't use drugs. That's going to go ahead and increase their chances of being compliant and conforming to their programs. And then also another risk of being a mandated client is really the loss of your employment and unfortunately family disintegration, where, one has to be then motivated into the program to be reunited with their family or their children. Now taking a look at cannabis, prevalence of it, over 4 million people meet the diagnostic criteria for marijuana abuse disorder. It is the most common drug that's used across all age groups, and that's primarily due to the decrease in the perception of risk. Amongst other drugs, marijuana is seen, since it's a central nervous depressant, seen a little bit harmless compared to other drugs. And there is research wondering whether it is a gateway drug or not, but really the most common across all age groups. And then NIDA reports that 9% of those who smoke marijuana daily will eventually end up developing a disorder, and that percentage increases as a person increases in age. Taking a look at the incidence, about 1 in 15 high school students smoke daily, and there is research now saying that more and more students are showing up to school under the influence of marijuana. Across adolescent and adult gender, males are more likely to develop marijuana dependence over women. And then taking a look at LGBT population, gay and lesbian men and women are more likely to develop a marijuana dependency versus heterosexual men and women. And Strassner alludes to that being the vulnerability associated with the population and the lack of supports. History and culture, really we can see that marijuana started out in the U.S. in the form of hemp in the 1600s, where it was a crop used for trade and also sold in pharmacies for medicinal purposes. We really see the first form of criminalization of marijuana in 1937 with the Marijuana Tax Act, which was passed after propaganda of this. There was this film, Evil Reefer, that really painted weed as evil. And then we kind of see some shifts happen. We see the Hemp for Victory campaign launched by the U.S. Department of Agriculture during World War II to support the economic venture of the war. But then in the 50s, we see stricter sentencing laws, minimum 2 to 10 years. In the 60s, we see a shift in popular culture under Johnson and Kennedy. And then in the 70s, there's a repeal of those mandatory sentences. NORML is established, which is the National Organization for Reform of Marijuana Laws. And in response, then parents' movement on drugs occurred. In the 80s, we see Bush's war on drugs, and then in the 90s, California legalizes medical use of marijuana under the Compassionate Use Act for those who are very ill. And then present day, we have 9 states that have legalized marijuana. Taking a look at culture, big part of popular culture was festivals such as Woodstock. There was the Summer of Love in San Francisco. The war, Vietnam War, over 14% soldiers were using marijuana on a regular basis. And then we see a lot through popular film and shows from, Cheech and Chong all the way down to Weeds, which shows a mom growing marijuana in a suburban community to raise her family. Legal implications. So marijuana is legalized for medicinal and recreational purposes in 30 states. 9 states have it for recreational use. and 21 states, including Pennsylvania, have it for medicinal. So as long as they have a medicine card, they're able to obtain and use marijuana in certain quantities. But marijuana is still illegal in 20 states. Economies over $700 million in sales, $76 million in tax revenue, California being the largest producer of marijuana cannabis, and then trafficking and distribution in the state of Pennsylvania. It does carry a felony penalty depending on how much of the drug one has, and proof must be shown that they grew it or obtained it and were going to deliver it to another. Policies, so the updated DSM-5 does expand the criteria for substance abuse disorder and kind of giving it ratings with mild, moderate, and severe. This can be seen as, either helpful by opening up more, by expanding the definition and giving more opportunity for people to be supported by it, or it can be seen as further pathologizing. Then we have the Affordable Care Act, which kind of expanded and integrated mental health and physical health services. But is it a step forward or backward? Because now is substance abuse being clumped together with physical health and losing its individualness and its focus. And then finally, decriminalization and legalization for medicinal and recreational purposes. And finally, this great article I found about social worker attitudes towards court-mandated substance abusing clients. This article really founded that therapists and clinicians, social workers in particular, are more likely to have a bias when working with an individual who's mandated for substance abuse due to moral and ethical values, and kind of what the implications of that are during treatment and what it can look like. Really great article, paints a very realistic picture of how it can be challenging to work with somebody in this position, and kind of gives some tools to step back and evaluate what the client's needs are and how we can meet them. All right, and here are my references with all of my articles in addition to the websites that I pulled some of the information from. Thank you.